operational mode.
Hello and welcome to the series of Tactic and Strategy Player's Guide, the Canoptek Circle. I'm Nick. I'm going to be running you through a team that I have been playing exclusively for probably the last 5 weeks or so since release. Got a lot to say. There's a fair bit here, so let's crack onto it. Canoptek Circle about to be nerfed? There's been some leaks from the potential world starter slate. I'm going to try and capture them changes in here because it's likely that some of them are going to be implemented. So I will address the team kind of as it is now and as it is or potentially will be when some changes come into effect. So it hasn't been long since the team released, and since then I just wanted to run through what I've done and why I think I'm qualified to kind of make this guide effectively, because a lot of people might question how much experience I've had, and so I just want to show you what I've done. I've been keeping track of the games I've played, wins, draws, losses, who against, etc. And I just want to basically provide that now. So I have, as you can see here, played 28 games. I've got one game tonight, and then I'll have another game next week with the Canoptek. That'll be 30 games in total. At this point, I've lost 7 games, I've drawn 1 game, and I've had 20 wins. In relation to them losses, the Wormblade loss and the Nemclaw loss and the Canoptek loss all went to time. I'm quietly confident I would have won the Canoptek loss and the very last Nemclaw loss there. So that would have, if we had been able to play out the rest of the turning points, I felt like I was in a very comfortable position to gain 2 victories there. So they are losses. Look, I'm not going to deny that at this point, but we had to take the scores as they were at the time ran out. So I've played a reasonably good spread of teams. I think I've played into Horde teams, I've played into Deathwatch, I've played into some stronger teams like Raveners, like Goremongers, like Nemclaw. I feel pretty confident with what I'm going to be bringing you all. And as you can see, the nerf I think is pretty justified, because that's a pretty ridiculous win rate if we're being completely honest. And I think I'm putting the team down once I finish these 30 games and trying something else, because it is a little, I would feel it would be oppressive to play against a player with this many wins, basically. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with the team. I have enjoyed playing them. The team is an 8-unit team. This is a 1-box kill team. They're part of the 2-mod box at the moment, but obviously there will be a team box released in the future. I think this team is a bit of a castle team where you basically want to just build a strong position, make the enemy come to you, and then punish them when they do. Competitively, at the moment, we are sitting, as of the 22nd of October, we're sitting at a 64% win rate in competitive events, which, once again, the nerf, I think, is justified to a degree, whatever comes there. This team really seems to struggle into fast melee-focused teams. I think matchup-wise, Goremongers, Raveners, and the Felgor have actually been troubling for this team. So, and my experience, I can kind of agree with that in a lot of ways, in terms of the fact that them kinds of teams are on you, you are threat saturated, and you have to try and, keep your head above water in them kinds of matchups, I guess you could say. I think this team's difficult. I don't think they're as difficult as Hyrotech, for example. They're not quite as, maybe this has come a bit more naturally to me, I'm not too sure, but I don't think that the playstyle itself is difficult. I think it's just difficult to accurately analyze the map and your opponent. I think that's where the difficulty comes in. So there's a bit of planning and calculation required for that. I think you obviously have very limited build options, in terms of you can take warriors with piercing guns, or you can take warriors with blast guns. That's kind of about it. You can also take 2 piercing tomb crawlers, but I don't really see the need for that with potentially a Torrent 1 or Torrent 2 profile. I just don't think that's justified. A lot of the time, I'd rather take the deleter gun, but that's just me. The team has multiple abilities that need to be utilized to maximize its value, especially when it comes to equipment, Firefight Ploys, and strategy plays. The Matrix is integral to this team. So basically, if you can't get the Matrix to work for you, this team is not a great team. The Matrix is really what makes the team sing. So learning how to utilize that. I've my Conquering the Canoptek guide, we talk about that a fair bit, so I don't want to touch on it too much here because it'll drag out the episode and it will, sew it all down. So if you're interested in that, check out the Conquering the Canoptek series. And then obviously this team just excels at controlling an area of the map and just punishing the enemy if they choose to engage with that. So it's very easy to lock down an area, sit on your matrix, and just be a nuisance to the opposition. And once again, map dependent, obviously team dependent, but that's generally how I play the game, as you can tell. Okay, let's have a look at the units. So we have a Cryptek Geomancer here. The Geomancer is the bread and butter of this team in terms of its abilities and the flexibility it provides you. So it's a super strong and reliable leader. It needs to be kept alive. You can access the Get Down Mr. President Firefight Ploy for this unit, which you need to keep a CP available for, etc. This team is the only way for this team to access 2 to 3 extra shoots per turn, and what I mean by that is you have a Canoptek control, which you can tell a tomb crawler or another operative to shoot. So that's obviously a second shot per turn. And then he has the Geomantic Disturbance, which allows you to shake a wall and do some damage. So I would kind of consider that a shot as well. So, he can shoot, the control can get someone to shoot, and then the Disturbance can do damage. That's how I'm looking at that 3 extra shots, or 3 shots per activation, and 2 extra shots per turn. Now, if he gets turned down, like it's being rumored, to 3 APL, I think that will be a big impact on the team, because that takes away the ability to move if you want to access them 3 things. The other thing is the molecular breach is also very, very important. So being able to shoot, shake the wall, molecular breach, and command is generally how I'm squeezing a lot of value out of the team. And if he does drop down to 3 APLs, then that is going to be a bit of a more of a tricky puzzle as to choosing what you'd like to do there. Our second models here are the Tomb Crawlers. You get 2 Tomb Crawlers. These guys do the other 2/3 of the major damage on this team. The rest of the shooting is pretty inconsistent and unreliable in my mind, but the Tomb Crawlers are definitely one of the 3 ways that you will get reliable, 8+ damage a turn, generally it feels like, against an enemy operative. They're amazing damage sponge with the 21 wounds, and they can hold up reasonably well in melee combat, especially if they're on the matrix, because they will get the availability to get the accurate 2, which goes a really long way. So Tomb Crawlers definitely, I think the only time you don't use them in melee combat is if the enemy operative has 15, 16 plus wounds, because then at that point, even with the soul drain on, you're only going to generally hit 2 to 3 times. You just can't effectively take them out, and if they've got 5 dice and they're hitting you for 5 or 6, then there's a good chance they can take you out in a sense. So just try and make sure that if you are engaging in melee with this unit, that you're not doing it against an operative with more than, I would say, 12 wounds, if that makes sense. Okay, moving on to our macrosites. Our macrosites, we've got 3 options here. The Accelerator. So the Accelerator I use as a APL buffer off matrix for Tomb Crawlers and stuff that I want to give a bit more flexibility to. You can, Jarrett pointed this out to me, which is an interesting point. You can use the Accelerator to reduce the APL of an opponent contesting a point, which can make a big difference for controlling that point. And in the later turning points, if you've got your matrix on that point as well, you can use an APL to take a point off of the Space Marine and APL off the Space Marine, effectively making him 2, and the Accelerator while he's on the matrix would be worth 3. So he can kind of get in there and sneak a point away, which is a really terrific way to use the Accelerator. I would consider the Accelerator expendable. I think I do most of my work with him giving out APL like confetti in the first 2 turning points. After that, everyone's kind of in position, and if I don't have enough warriors available, he is my next de facto warrior, effectively. So basically use him to charge, use him to chip damage, use him to get your bigger model safe, or make your bigger model safe, or get down Mr. President with him if absolutely necessary. The Reanimator has a hugely powerful heal, obviously 3d3. At the moment, you can do this 3 times a turning point, which is too much. So he can do it himself, he can be commanded to do it, and then you can counteract and do it. So that's effectively 9d3 healing per turning point. I agree that that's too much. I think once per turning point is probably sufficient. I wouldn't mind if it just wasn't commanded, like he couldn't be commanded to heal, I think, or he could only use it once with a command or by himself, and then I still think we should have access to it in a counteract situation, but that's just me. That might be too much still. So his medic ability is also quite good because obviously he just has to be on the matrix with the other unit, which means that visibility isn't a factor, so it's quite a good way to reliably keep models alive. I would say in turning point 4 he becomes expendable, because at that point if he can heal and then put him in a position to block a charge and deny your opponent some points, then that's definitely worth taking that chance. I found that he's a very valuable bait piece in terms of if we're at a bit of a stalemate and I'm not able to progress my position, dangling him out there will generally get the enemy team or your opponent's team to pull themselves out of position to try and get him down. So in that regard, I've been able to use him in a couple of games to bait key pieces out into the open, at which point then I've been able to clean them up and secure a victory. The warriors are really the workhorses of the team, I would say. They have the two loadouts available, the Gal Scalpel or the Tesla Caster. Anytime I'm going up against something that ignores piercing or has more than 10 operatives, I'm just going for the Tesla Caster, especially on Into the Dark. Otherwise, it's the Gas Scalpel. I think the Gal Scalpel, even into elites on the 2 mod on that, is better personally, but I mean, there's probably some people out there that know the maths that are got a better idea of how that works. They're very expendable, obviously, because you get 1 back each turn. They're very good at chipping and tying up models. You need to spend them wisely. Don't lose all 3 of them in a single turning point, because then you can only get 1 back. That's not advisable. What I have found, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later on, is basically they work really good at moving into an area where if your opponent wants to ignore them, they then have to move all the way around them. And with a 28mm base and another inch of contact area there, that effectively gives you an 1.5 inch wide, or about just over a 3-inch width light barricade that they have to work around. So that's how we'll use them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Equipment considerations for the team. I have some thoughts on this that differ from some of the other people in my area, so I take this with a grain of salt to a degree. Awaken Obelisk Nodes for me is an auto pick. I use Awaken Obelisk Nodes to stall out early activations of the game, especially against elites who have limited activations, and it also allows you to pivot your positioning with the matrix, which is hugely important depending on the situation that you're in. So what I will often do, especially with Nemclaw, as they start to stage up, especially into turning point 2 and 3, they might be playing quite cagey. They might make a move or two. You might move your reanimator and your accelerator, for example, and then you don't want to then give anything else away going into like the 3rd activation for the game. So I just use Awaken Obelisk Nodes at that point to stall an activation out. And then at that point, they're potentially up to their 3rd or 4th activation. They have to start doing something. So I use it as a stall. I think it's a really great way to hold your position and make the enemy continue to move if you've got the space for it. So I often find myself taking them every single game. If I roll a 1 or a 2, that's fine. I only need 1 or 2 uses to get to stalls there when I need them. So yeah, hugely important in my opinion. The Nano Scarab Caskets are just an auto pick. D3 wounds when you activate. It's a no-brainer. It helps offset chip damage. It helps offset poison, burn, etc. So definitely worth taking. Phase Shifter is an auto pick into any team with multiple piercing weapons or a melter gun. It takes a melter gun obviously from piercing 2 to piercing 1, which then with a shield flare can kind of all of a sudden you don't have to care about melter guns anymore, which is pretty important. So definitely, if the team has a lot of piercing or melter guns, the Phase Shifter becomes very, very important. The Matrix Manipulator has its place. I have never run it previously in the past. I know people have run it and had some success with it. I think it's just a bit too situational to guarantee its usage. And with this kind of team, taking the razor wire, heavy barricades, smoke grenades, or mines is, in my mind, a more valuable choice than taking something you may or may not need. Take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, you might have a slightly different playstyle, which requires it a bit more often, but I just build the Matrix. I put the Geomancer in there. That's where he stays. And I haven't really felt the need for the Manipulator to be a thing at all. Smoke grenades are really good against strong shooting, especially if you're trying to move up the board, obviously. Generally, we don't have a way of ignoring skewering, so you need to be kind of smart with how and when you do it. But they are something that can just give you a bit of a chance against a very, very strong shooting team or a shooting team with a lot of piercing available. I like the heavy barricade to put in maps where there's not a good position for the Geomancer to go to threaten with that 8-inch terrain shaking ability. So I will use the barricade. I take the barricade pretty often to the heavy barricade to do that. I think it's a really good chance to give that Geomancer some nice cover out in an open area where he can then threaten that 8-inch terrain shake, basically. The razor wire and light barricades I think are really good for wall building, and this is particularly important in my mind for teams where you're going to become threat saturated pretty quickly. So aggressive melee hordes, for example, elves, when you've got multiple units coming in and you can only shoot with good guns, 3 or 4 turns, a turning point, you might end up threat saturated, and building a bit of a wall on a few key areas can just make that go from like a tidal wave to a trickle. And I think that's really important. The other thing is we're not really interested in getting to their side of the board unless we're trying to deny flank or something along them lines. So we're happy to sit generally in our own half, and the wall then becomes inconsequential for us. Mines are another one where I put a mine on a key choke point that I'm not planning on passing at all, and then just, the horde player then has to just throw an operative at the mine, which, can be pretty damaging for some teams and can really throw off their tempo. So mines are another option there to consider if you feel like you can take basically razor wire light barricades and a mine. I think that becomes pretty good to slow down them kinds of teams. Okay, ploys. Now we've got our strategy ploys here. These are all good in a vacuum. I find myself taking transdynamic pretty much every single time, with potentially soul drain if I need it, or hyper shielding. So we'll talk about them. Hyper shielding is very situational. If there's no chance of you being charged and you're playing into a shooting team, then it's viable in terms of the fact that you're going to be just rolling defense all turning point. So at that point, for a single CP, it's much better value than using a CP reroll. If you are going to be charged or potentially melee fought, and you might only be shot once or twice, then it's probably not worth the CP, because you naturally have pretty good saves. Not very often are you just getting blown off the board unexpectedly. So I don't find myself taking it as often as some others, but it does have its place for sure. Transdynamic amplification is just an auto take, except for turning point 1, unless you plan on doing some shooting. The ceaseless just gives you the ability to go from, generally with the accurate in place, 2 dice on 4 up or 3 dice on 4 up. The ceaseless there gives you a chance to really sink some damage in. So you should be taking it every turn effectively, except for turning point 1. Cryptographic repulsion. I have taken this and it's been a complete waste of time because I haven't correctly identified where operatives can move. So a lot of the time what I'll do is I'll try and combo this ploy with doorways. So that way that if an enemy chooses to move into the room, they're going to lose 1 for the access point and then 1 for the matrix. And at that point, it can do a lot of work. Measure out where your opponents are and their charge ranges. If they are within that charge range distance by an inch, then use the cryptographic repulsion. If they're going to make it by 3 inches, it's useless. If they're not going to make it by an inch or 2 inches or 3 inches, then it's also useless. And then the other half of this is the melter gun shot. So you need to position the matrix in a way that the melter gun operative can't get within 6 inches of your good targets. But this means that the matrix is nowhere near your valuable units, which means you're not getting accurate 2 and a +1 APL in most situations. So cryptographic repulsion, good on certain maps, I think, where access points make a big difference to moving through the map. But otherwise, I just don't find it being very handy unless there's 2 or 3 operatives that will be denied a charge if I have it on. So that's kind of where I'm at. I would rather take, when it comes to charges, Soul Drain, because Soul Drain is very strong and has very few limitations. And against like the right operative, it can make like your Geomancer to a degree, but definitely the Tomb Crawlers effectively unkillable. The Soul Drain says, whenever you're within the node, whenever you're fighting or retaliating against an operative that's on the node, or if you've moved through that matrix this turn, like this activation, then you have the Soul Drain on you. So like I said, you can put the matrix forward, the enemy moves through the matrix and gets to one of your tomb crawlers, the soul drain is in effect even if neither of you are on the matrix at that point. So it is a very, very good ploy when it comes to the melee fighting and bits and pieces like that. Firefight Ploys Shield Flare, I always leave 2 CP available, and that is for Shield Flare and Sacrificial Thrall. So Shield Flare is hugely important. This takes a potentially lethal melter gun shot, for example, or something plasma gun shot, potentially lethal shot, and it takes it away. There's, Justice Scratches are popular for a reason. You need to leave a CP available for it. This is pretty much just a must-have available. And just remember though, it's only operational on the matrix. You do not have access to it if you're off matrix, so keep that in mind. Animate obelisk nodes are massive for stalling and flexing. This is why we take the equipment to benefit it, but in a pinch you can obviously pay for it if you need to. It's just the equipment takes away the cost. You don't have the CP to muck around with it, so that's kind of how I would use it. Nodal response is super situational and is very powerful when you do need it, but spending an extra CP to swap things, a bit of overkill sometimes. And also, let's say you take Soul Drain because you know you're going to get charged a couple of times. The charges go off, you then pay for the nodal response and you swap it to transdynamic amplification so you can get access to the ceaseless. That's a justified way to do it. However, if you take the Soul Drain and they don't charge you in the first couple of activations and they stall them activations out, then you then have to potentially pay for nodal response to get it to transdynamic amplification so you can take shots early, and then the soul drain's not available for if you get charged later on. So I think it's very much like it can be a bit of a trap where I wouldn't want to rely on it. I would only be using it in niche situations where I really need to change the way the turning point is gone and my access to what I have available. So that's kind of where I'm at. You might think a little bit differently. That's absolutely fair. But I haven't been using it. I don't think I've ever used it in my games. Just have a look at the board, make an informed decision. Generally, you're going to pick the right strat ploy from the get-go. Sacrificial Thrall is amazing. It's imperative that it's available. Losing the Geomancer is just too damaging to the team. Unless there's a world in which your Geomancer is just not threatened and cannot be threatened, you can spend the CP on something else. But basically, like I said, I just have 2 CP available at the start of each turning point, purely for Shield Flare, purely for Sacrificial Thrall, and then I can be a bit more aggressive and I can say, hey, come and take this shot and let's see what actually happens. Just keep in mind that you have to activate it before dice are rolled. And I've had it a lot of times where I'll say, hey, I've got the Get Down Mr. President at the start of the game. Turning point 3, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to take a shot at your Geomancer. I'm going to say, okay, I use Sacrificial Thrall. And then the opponent's going to say, oh, well, I'll just pick someone else. No, hold them to it. That was the decision that they made. I know it sounds a bit dickish, but at the same time, you've given them the warning that you have it. Punish them, use the ploy how it's meant to be used, and punish them for their decisions. That's kind of what the game's about to a degree. So be open and honest, but also, if they try and cheat you out of that, I think that's a bit unfair. So try and hold them to it. Okay, general tips. We've discussed this a little bit now, but the GMS is the key to the team. You need to maximize his actions, and that will be how easily you do in the game is how well you've managed the Geomancer. I think his actions are just integral to your success. Molecular Breach, the Geomancer's ability needs to be used to exploit certain maps and threaten areas. This is especially important with Vantage on certain Volcus maps, Beta Decima as well, for example. And then also with your Tomb World and Into the Dark, it's very important to getting threats through walls that you might not want to spend the movement to have to work around. Just remember, you can also Molecular Breach yourself, which is kind of fun. The other thing is getting a warrior to plant a banner on Vantage. The Molecular Breach gets the warrior there, and that can really throw your opponent off if you've got a plant banner up on the second level of the Volcus terrain, because he just has such a hard time getting to it, basically. So definitely keep that in mind. I think the accelerator should be used twice in the first turning point to maximize your warrior and tomb crawler's threat potential. So obviously you can activate the accelerator, give 1 APL out, and then activate the Geomancer, command the accelerator to give another 1 APL out. That, especially coming into turning point 2, that means that the opponent has to deal with 2 off-node threats that can, you know, reposition, dash, shoot, or fight, charge, you know, and lock someone up, or fight, charge, a fight, shoot, charge, or something along them lines, basically. But it makes the opponent, as Taz pointed out to me, have to work with the mental gymnastics of having two operatives that can, you know, provide much larger threat ranges than usual. So that's a really key point to consider. Matrix positioning is the key to the team. I think that if you want to get good with Canoptek, the matrix is what you need to get good at. Every map and every opponent in terms of their team selection will require you to change or tweak where you put the matrix, how you position it all, where your operatives are on that matrix, etc. You just need to learn how to utilize it correctly. I'm still mostly using the triangle approach. I think the only time I haven't used it is into a Canoptek mirror match and against the Raveners, because the Raveners were just so easily able to get into the triangle and threaten the units in there. So they're the two times where I've been using a line rather than the triangle. I really think the triangle has a lot of potential, and I've had a lot of success with it, as you can see by my games. So that you do what you want at the end of the day. I'm not going to tell you how to play the game. I'm just throwing it out there that learning the matrix is really the key to the team. CP expenditure is very important. It's very easy to mismanage the amount of CP you have available, especially if your opponent's making you go first in some of them later rounds and you're only getting one back. If you're only getting one back, let's say you have 3 to begin with, you get 4 on the second turning point, you spend 2 on transdynamic and something else, you leave 2 spare, you go first again, then basically you just take transdynamic and you still leave the 2 CP spare. If you're in a point where you've found yourself down to a single CP and that's all you're getting back for the turning point, then you basically take nothing. You rely on the accurate 2 and you keep that available for either your shield flare or your sacrificial throw. But yeah, CP expenditure is a very tough thing to get right with the team. This team can be surprisingly tanky. I think you have to try and learn when you can lean on certain abilities and when that you can naturally just kind of absorb a hit. I had a funny game against the Breaches where he had the Satchel Charge, which was a piercing 2. He had the Melter Gun, which was a piercing 2. So the Melter Gun, I put my Geo in a pretty aggressive position to try and bait them 2 threats out. He definitely went for the bait. The Melter Gun came around the corner and blasted the Geomancer. I did the sacrificial throw. No, I bounced him back up with the Reanimator's ability on 1 health. So that was the Melter Gun taken care of. Then the Satchel Charge guy came in. At that point, I got to activate before that. I got the Reanimator to heal me, or the Reanimator activated and healed me. The Satchel guy came in. I then did the shield flare, did phase shielding or whatever the equipment is to turn off 1 piercing, and then I lived through that as well. When you start to realize when and how to use equipment and ploys, you'd be amazed what you can survive. And I think that's a kind of key, because you do need to sometimes, you know, put your units in compromised positions, but making them kind of calculations will determine your success effectively. The warriors are expendable, but not at 2 or 3 a round. So just keep that in mind. You know, sometimes you're going to have to just throw warriors at a problem, and then that is what it is. But try not to be silly with the way you do it, basically. I think the Reanimator's a super valuable unit that the enemy will put resources into gunning for. I've definitely used it to pull units out of position and compromise the enemy staging and everything like that, and then punish them if they do manage to get the Reanimator. Look, I've only been using 1 tac-op with this team, and that is Plant Banner. And the reason I've been doing that is it's a single APL for the entire game. I can put it in a position where I can protect it, and then the enemy has to deal with it. And I can make them come to me. And I think that's a really big part of this team as well. Because, you know, if they're trying to score points and do their stuff, and I'm just scoring points by default, they have to deal with that in some way, because otherwise we end up both scoring incredibly highly, and you know they will be compromised on their game just based on the 9 tac points I can achieve with the Plant Banner. 6 obviously getting it and then choosing tac as the primary. So they have to come to you. That's what you want. Okay, so advanced tips now. The Tomb Crawler eyes are as low, if not lower, than Rattling eyes. So you need to be really careful with vantage terrain, because they can't see over a lot of it, and it although advantage is really good because it gives you a lot of available shooting across a map, it can also be a curse because if you can't see over the terrain, you can't make the valid shot. So there's a lot of Vulcus terrain, I'd say probably the majority of it, when you're on vantage there, that you can't see past it. So just keep in mind the tomb crawler's eyes and where they are, and try and make sure that if you're going to put them on vantage, that they are in a position where they can have the most amount of vision available across the map. I think setting up on the matrix, especially, on 1 or 2 crit objectives and then planting the banner, as we kind of just discussed, without being challenged means you're going to score 12 points, at least 12 points. So the enemy is going to have to decide, or the opponent is going to have to decide how they deal with that. Are they going to just let you have them points while you pick at them and they try and play their game? Or are they going to start coming over and trying to contest what you're doing? The banner is a really great, like I said, draw card to get them to have to come and deal with you. And when they do, then you can obviously start to take care of them. The warriors are a really good way to roadblock threats. So what I mean by this is, even in a large room, if someone stages up a melee operative in your, that's potentially within charge distance of you, run a warrior forward so they're within the 2 inches of that unit, directly in between, like let's say your Geomancer, for example, and then take a shot with the warrior. You might do 3 damage, and that's fine. The enemy then, when they activate, has to run all the way around the warrior towards your unit, which in a lot of the time they won't have the available movement for. So that means that they have to either shoot the warrior and try and kill it, or charge the warrior and fight the warrior, and then they're stuck in no man's land. It's just a really great way to roadblock your threats, your enemy threats, and to block up lanes and bits and pieces like that. In turning points 3 and 4, you can justify losing points on the kill op, especially if you've still got all 5 available, using the Accelerator and Reanimator as effectively de facto warriors. And that can help you buy some breathing room on the attack and crit ops, which is obviously quite important. And then your operative placement really needs to be borderline perfect to ensure your pieces are protected in the correct way and that they're positioned to be used to take retaliatory shots and everything in the correct way. So the matrix is in my mind, the biggest part of it. The second biggest part then is, how are you positioning your operatives on the matrix, and how are you, getting them to head off threats before they get to you, and deal with the, denying the enemy as much as possible. So this is a team where getting placement correct is really important and definitely needs to be considered. Okay, so now let's have a look at how we want to apply this knowledge for the Canoptek Circle. Obviously, as with every guide we do, you need to understand the strengths of the team and how to apply them within the game. You then also need to understand your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, and then how to counter them or exploit them. This team needs to be used in conjunction with the Matrix. It's not optional, it's mandatory that you make use of the Matrix to as much of an advantage as you can effectively. And then within that, your Geomancer needs to stay alive and preferably on the Matrix to get the most value out of him. I think you will need to consider your opponent and the map layouts, and will vary how you're going to approach the game. It's very important, I think, to ensure that you're aware of the subtle differences between some of the maps and how they can affect your game, especially when it relates to getting to particular crit ops and stuff like that. And also plant banner to a degree as well, because some maps are it's very easy to plant a banner in a very nice, difficult spot to get to, and other times it can be quite difficult. So that is what it is. Use the plant banner to force the opponents to come to you. I think all the other attacks are a little too complicated or a little too resource intensive. Plant banner, it's literally just move someone up, plant it, and then just make sure you can continue to contest it. I think it's very easy to achieve. I think you need to use the warriors, as we discussed, to block lanes and lock down enemy ranged threats, especially their melter gunners, their plasma gunners. If you can charge a warrior into them, then that's something they've got to deal with. They're going to waste a lot of resources trying to deal with that, and that allows you to buy time to advance your own game position, which is very important. The accelerator and reanimator can obviously be used in a pinch to buy time if you're desperate, especially in the later turning points as they become less important to the overall ability, flexibility of the team. You can afford to throw them at units if you're desperate to. You usually only have one spare equipment slot, so I think make the most of that choice, i.e. heavy barricade, light barricades, razor wire, mines, whatever it is. Just, have a look. It's very map dependent. It's very opponent dependent. You can't really afford to skip on taking multiple pieces of faction equipment. The faction equipment is pretty imperative to the team. So yeah, just consider what your options are there and how that looks. And then obviously try to get a feel for how much damage you can take. This is really important. You can take a fair bit. Tomb crawlers with the soul drain on can easily stand up to typically most Marines. So yeah, try and get an understanding of what you can take, what kind of punishment you can take, and then that will allow you to get an understanding of how aggressive you can be with your placement, how much you can bait shots, and how easily you can contest objectives effectively. So keep all of that in mind. I think one of the keys to this team is you are able to take a real beating. Try and use that to your advantage where you can to pull enemy models out of position, or to potentially have them engage with a unit that they later regret engaging with. Look, I think that's about all for the Canoptek. I really hope you've gotten something out of this. I've enjoyed the team. They are a little too strong. I'm not 100% happy with the changes that look like they're coming. I don't think that they're all warranted. I think they've been hit, quite a large hammer. But at the same time, yeah, I'm happy to kind of put them down here and move on to something else. I think I'll be back to these guys in the future, and we'll see how my thoughts change, I guess, over time. But yeah, thank you very much for hanging around. I hope this guide is of some value to you, and I'll see you around on the next one.